What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you the final installment of our ranking series we're doing over here at the Fantasy Stock Exchange YouTube channel. So if you guys are seeing this, you would have already seen all of the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers this past week. We got to finally end it off with the most confusing position in fantasy football. We got to end it off with tight ends, of course, baby. But with that being said, Corey, how are you doing today?
Yeah, and we're going to try and keep this one short because we know really nobody cares about tight ends, especially outside of the top 7 or 8 guys. We're going to try and cover these guys quickly in a little bit faster of a manner than we did running backs, but it's understandable. We got to talk about running backs a long time because running backs are what win people fantasy championships. Not that tight ends don't do it, but it's a lot more rare that they do it than running backs do it. So yeah, we're going to rip through these as quick as we can. If you guys enjoy this video at any point, as always, like, comment, subscribe. All that stuff helps us out tremendously and it helps us grow. So if you want to support the channel, that's all you really have to do that. You can join the Discord if you guys want to be involved in a community of a bunch of other like-minded fantasy football players. We're talking football nonstop in there pretty much. So, and then again, that's also free to do too. So you don't have to pay for that.
Sure. Get in that Discord. Talk with the boys. We're all chatting this shit. We're all having a good time in there, and you make sure you're in that free Discord. So yeah. Anyways, hit that intro. Okay, so before we get into these tight ends, we're going to show you guys the whole top 15 that we have amongst our consensus, amongst our own personal ranks for you to gander at. Before we get into the guys, roll up our sleeves and get in the gritty one by one. So as you guys can see, at that top, on his own tier, in that red tier, we're going to start off with number 1. And that's going to be the guy who wears red in real life, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, is there really any other reason why we have him at tight end 1? Like, do we need to say anything else other than the fact that this guy is as consistent as they come? So, Corey, I got to ask you a question, right? Who finished tight end 1 in 2016?
Travis Kelce.
What about 2017?
Travis Kelce.
2018?
Travis Kelce.
Oh, 2019?
Travis Kelce.
2020?
Travis Kelce.
All right, and who has Patrick Mahomes throwing him the ball?
Travis Kelce.
And who's in the best offense in the NFL?
Travis Kelce.
So if you guys don't get the hint here, that's why he's number 1. Not to mention, this guy has gotten 136 plus targets in each of the past 3 years and is coming off a season where he broke the tight end receiving yards record and had 11 touchdowns in 15 games. I mean, similar to what we said with Tyreek Hill, this is a guy you can easily project for 8+ touchdowns at the tight end position on any given year, given the overall efficiency of this offense. Like, if anybody doesn't have Travis Kelce number 1 in their redraft rankings, they're just trying to be different.
Right. And it's a conversation in dynasty with George Kittle because he's younger and so is Waller. But at the point you're at with Travis Kelce, just take him and shut the hell up. Like, don't even bother trying to get cute and ranking George Kittle ahead of him. I love Trey Lance. You love Trey Lance. We're not going to pretend that Trey Lance is enough of a QB upgrade to put George Kittle above Travis Kelce because we have absolutely zero question marks about Travis Kelce's situation. Speaking of George Kittle, he's our tight end too. The NFL's biggest superstar at the position, in my opinion. I think he's the best tight end in the league, but he fell victim to injuries last year, much like we saw with Christian McCaffrey at the running back position. We've seen George Kittle produce in an offense led by Jimmy Garoppolo the past couple of years. And if Lance can be anything better than Jimmy Garoppolo, which I think he can absolutely do, and if he can be Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray level of quarterback, which is what we both think is in the range of outcomes from a dynasty perspective, we're talking about George Kittle finally having the touchdown upside that he's never had in his career. You could see on the screen 2 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, and 2 touchdowns in his career. He's never had more than 5 touchdowns in a single season. And to me, that's just a testament to the QB play. It has nothing really to do with George Kittle as a talent. And I think that ends this year with Trey Lance in the fold, probably starting about half the season, if not more. I think he's immediately an upgrade over Jimmy G.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, we love Trey Lance. We had him as one of the top overall talents in this class. I mean, this class was ridiculous as it is. And post-draft, he is our dynasty quarterback 1 amongst rookies. That is going to help George Kittle play. I mean, you got question marks around the offense, but let's be honest here. When George Kittle is on the field, George Kittle is the number 1 alpha threat of that team. So anyways, we can move off George Kittle. I think most people pretty much understand who the top 3 were. they're just kind of confused as to who 2 and who 3 would be. Well, if you guys were listening and were wondering for Darren Waller's name, he's going to be our number 3 tight end of the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, the fact that we have a tight end with multiple double-digit target games last year, 7, at tight end 3, is just a testament to how elite these top 3 guys are, and quite frankly, makes them the only 3 worthwhile tight end picks if you're going to go early tight end. So he's the engine of this offense. And with Aguilar departing, any step forward from the 2 young wide receivers really shouldn't cut into what Waller did. I mean, Aguilar was the best performing wide receiver on the Raiders offense last year. So even if Ruggs steps up, even if Dynasty Twitter wants to bust a nut and freaking Bryan Edwards comes out of nowhere, no, Darren Waller is not going to be the one affected this year. This is the alpha. This is the lead dog. This is a guy coming off a 146 target season. What I'm hoping for is that maybe Ruggs can even compliment him. If Ruggs is stretching the field, Darren Waller can be that absolute possession guy in that middle of the field for Derek Carr, as we saw even last year. And he finally got that touchdown bump we were clamoring for after 2019, boosting from 3 touchdowns in 2019 to 9 in 2020. And he is absolutely the type of threat to consistently get at that 8, 9, 10 type of range. And if he's doing that with the targets there that he's currently getting, he is a top 3 tight end lock.
Right. And I actually don't blame people if they want to rank him straight up ahead of George Kittle, because we do have some concerns with George Kittle. He's got to compete for targets with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. He also has a more run heavy offense and a quarterback that's going to run the ball as well. But all that being said, I think George Kittle is still going to be the tight end 2 for me. I don't think I'm going to move Darren Waller ahead of him, even though Darren Waller did show us that touchdown upside that we wanted to see from Kittle. I think Kittle's going to get there this year. The real conversation when it comes to these guys is, where do you draft them, right? Because we both know that Travis Kelce is a bona fide locked in top, 16 pick in redraft, but where are you comfortable drafting Darren Waller and George Kittle specifically?
Well, I'll tell you right now, Kelce, you said top 16. He's most likely at this point a locked-in top 10 pick from what I've noticed in underdog best ball mocks. He's going off the board around that 7-8 range. Now, maybe that's a little bit early for me, but regardless, if I'm looking at it, would I rather spend a top 7 or 8 overall pick on Kelce or a late second-round pick on Waller or Kittle? I would most likely take that value jump and go for a Waller Kittle at that current range. So that's typically where you'll see them go off. Kelce being that mid to late first round, Kittle, Waller being at that 2-3 type turn, typically in that second round area though. But yeah, if you want one of these guys, you're going to have to pay a premium price. But at the end of the day here, while you might not like your team initially, because you're going to be like, well, fuck, I wish I got a running back at that spot. When you're comparing the fact that you have Darren Waller in at that tight end spot over like Robert Tonyan, you're going to be thanking your lucky stars, because this guy's going to be a consistent producer all year this year. So anyways, we can get off him and kind of take that tier down into the next tier of tight ends, the more middle round type guys, the guys you're going to see going in the rounds 4, 5, 6 type area. Take it away with the number 1 weapon for Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews.
Right. And I think when you're talking about middle round tight ends in general, this has usually been a bit of a fantasy wasteland in the past. If you go back and look at ADP of middle round tight ends, you'll see guys like OJ Howard and Evan Ingram and Hunter Henry, who are fine options, I guess, when they're on the field, but they're not really worth the pick that you had to spend on them, because you're likely passing on some great options at wide receiver, even some of the top, 5 or 6 quarterbacks in ADP, and potentially some running backs that could turn some value as well. So this year, more than any, I want to say that I actually am in more on the middle rounds of tight ends than I normally am. I usually am a guy that just completely punts the position if I don't get those top guys. But this year, especially with Mark Andrews, I've noticed him slipping to a point that I'm willing to take him. Probably one of the sneakier winners of the NFL draft, in my opinion. Mark Andrews was never going to be 120 target tight end, but the great thing for Andrews is that the potential efficiency uptick and passing volume uptick that we're likely to see, given the fact that Greg Roman's immediately coming out after the draft and talking about adding more passing balance to the offense. This is a team that only threw the ball 406 times last year, which was by far the lowest in the NFL. And if that goes up to 480, which will still probably be one of the lowest in the NFL, that's an additional 74 pass attempts, and that would still rank them 31st in the NFL last year. And I think that's a reasonable uptick, potentially even over that 500 mark for the Ravens offense next year. And we're talking about a guy that gets all of the most valuable targets on the field for Baltimore, and for a team that's led by a top 10 to 15 quarterback at minimum, for a top 10 offense in the NFL. You can see it on the screen right now. He got 9 deep targets, which was 7th at the position. His average depth of target was 5th at the position. Number 1 in air yards in his offense. Number 5 in route participation. He just gets his hog rate is number 5. He just gets involved in the Ravens offense. And yeah, it's a small pie that he's, working within, but he has a big share of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Andrews is going to be a beast. And we talked about it with Kittle. We talked about it with Waller. We talked about it with Kelce. They're the main cogs that keep their offense going. And as much as I love Rashad Bateman coming in, as much as people want to maybe hop in on that Marquise Brown hype train, Mark Andrews is that guy. When we're in that short yardage type situations, we're in that goal line type situations, Mark Andrews is going to be peppered with the ball. And in general, if you're going to be the main target for Lamar Jackson, you're going to find your way in your top 5 ranking. So he's currently my 5. He's your 4. And we can kind of transition to my 4, your 5, or the guy that we have tied as our consensus 4 in our rankings. And that's going to be TJ Hockenson. And you mentioned Mark Andrews being one of the biggest winners of the offseason. I think TJ Hockenson absolutely has a case for that as well. Again, we're talking about a guy who in his offense alone vacates 192 targets from last year. That's not even talk about how good he was last year, even without those guys gone. So as a second-year tight end last year, Hockenson comes off a 101 target, 67 reception, and 723 yard with 6 touchdown type of campaign, and has really all the opportunity, as I mentioned, to develop into that next top tier tight end. If we're going to pick anybody in this range to end up developing into like the Darren Waller, George Kittle type tier, I think TJ Hockenson, based off the available volume alone, has the opportunity to do so. So as I mentioned, they're absolutely barren of assets in the receiving game. I mean, we're talking about Quintez Cephas, Brashad Perriman, Tyrell Williams currently making and Amon St. Brown currently making up their wide receiver core right now. And that's simply not going to do it. I mean, overall, we want to hype up DeAndre Swift. We want to hype up TJ Hockenson because they are by far the most talented players in this entire offense. The only real concern you might have is, well, how is this team going to do from an offensive efficiency standpoint? Because they're probably going to be one of the worst offenses in the league. But from a sheer volume standpoint, I think he's safe to project as a top 5 overall tight end because we could be talking about an 80 reception, 900 yard, 5 touchdown type tight end this year.
Right. And it's going to take them being somewhat efficient on offense because, I mean, imagine some people are going to be like, well, can they be as good as the Raiders offense? Because that was enough to support Darren Waller, and he's the main target in that offense. But the Raiders were top 10 offense last year in points per game. So I think the Lions are probably going to be an okay offense, maybe like 22nd in the NFL. And at that point, we really need TJ Hockenson to get a lot of targets and to do a lot on his own because we all know that Jared Goff isn't going to make life very easy on him. He'll get him the ball where he needs to be, but he's not going to throw him open or make him create any big plays down the field. So we're looking at a situation that is almost purely volume based, but he is a very talented player in his own right. And when talent meets volume, usually good things happen. The only issue is going to be how many touchdowns does this guy score? Because if he only scored 4 touchdowns, he's probably going to disappoint some people.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that as well. This is the type of guy, I mean, we mentioned it a ton of times with the running backs and wide receivers. We're going to rank guys like, especially the top 3. You have the case for Mark Andrews simply because their overall upside is probably higher. But at the tight end position, he's a guy that you're going to take in the middle rounds. You're not going to be upset at all with the investment you make because, quite frankly, if he plays a full 16 games, I just don't see any way he busts given the available targets he has to him. Anyways, we can move into the next guy. And this is where the rookie comes in. Everybody wants to hail him as the dynasty tight end 1 because he's 21 and people love age in dynasty. But we're going to talk about Kyle Pitts. And yes, the hype is absolutely real, as we mentioned in the dynasty video. I mean, this is a 99th percentile athlete at the position, at the tight end position, who produced like a madman in college. We're talking about a 770-yard, 12 touchdown season in only 8 games this year as a true junior. And all of that is backed up by his tape. I mean, every single tape watcher that I really respect, you're talking about the Dane Bruglers, you're talking about guys of that type of nature, all had him as one of the top 3 overall players in this class. And not to mention, he gets that affordable draft capital that the Falcons were coveting him at that 4th overall pick. So with Julio potentially on the way out, there's a clear opportunity for Pitts to come in, cement himself as Matt Ryan's number 2 option in the Atlanta passing core. And Pitts is every bit the type of player to be able to stand up and claim that role right off the bat. I mean, we're talking about a 21-year-old kid that has already developed into his man body and now works with head coach Arthur Smith, where his origin is literally as a tight ends coach. So if there's one coach that can really develop Pitts right away, it's going to be Arthur Smith, acclimating him to that system. And the sky's the limit. I mean, we're having him at 6 right now. Would I be shocked if he's breaking tight end records as a rookie, if he's having a 900-yard, 7, 8, 9 touchdown season as a rookie? I would not be surprised in the slightest bit. But the fact that he is a rookie, and the fact that if you actually look at the overall data collection of rookie tight ends in the past, not being too great in year one, you kind of have to balance it out a little bit. As much as I love his potential, as much as I love his ceiling, let's be a little bit more realistic if we're going to project him going into the season, because you want him to really grow into that ceiling projection. You don't want to just draft him at that spot, because what type of value are you going to get if you're just taking him where you expect him to be at his absolute best?
Right. And I think the thing that is interesting with tight ends in general, and this might be a whole separate discussion, but we used to say that about receivers too, right? Remember, we used to be like, oh, receivers never produce early in their career. It was just pretty much Odell Beckham and Randy Moss at that point in history. And we've seen recently receivers are coming into the league right away and they're producing. And with tight ends too, we never saw tight ends produce in their second season. And Mark Andrews did it. TJ Hockenson did it. Noah Fant did it. Like it's easier and easier to throw in the NFL, and tight ends are acclimating a little bit easier to the NFL game. And when you look at Kyle Pitts and you look at the way Arthur Smith is probably going to use him, you can look at the way Jonnu Smith was used, and you can see he was used 150 snaps, not in line as a tight end, in the slot and out wide, in the backfield. Like, Kyle Pitts has so much versatility that Arthur Smith is just going to have a field day with this guy. And like you said, if Julio Jones is gone, that's going to vacate, a lot of production in a big time role. And Calvin Ridley can't do everything. Russell Gage is going to be involved in the slot, but Calvin Ridley can't get every single target on this team. Kyle Pitts is going to walk into a lot of volume if Julio Jones is moved, which is pretty much the expectation for a lot of people right now.
Yep, absolutely. So we can move on to our next option. And this is a guy who athletically is pretty on par with what we've seen from Kyle Pitts. Now, he's not the exact athlete of Kyle Pitts, but talking about a guy who's super fast for his size, can stretch the seam, can really be that ultimate vertical weapon of his offense. We were talking about this guy 2 years ago in that TJ Hockenson class, and was actually his teammate at Iowa. So you can take it away next with Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and he's a 23-year-old dude. He's still really young. This is not really a dynasty relevant thing, but it is important knowing that he's been producing at a young age in the NFL. It's a real thing. Came off a near 100 target, 700-yard sophomore season where he improved on his drops and his inconsistent play that we saw from him in his rookie season dramatically. And it's a tough situation to project all around, I would say, because I think somebody is bound to disappoint in this Denver Broncos offense. When we look at what Courtland Sutton is being drafted at, what Jerry Jeudy is being drafted at, and what Noah Fant is being drafted at, we're relying on Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater to appease fantasy owners with 3 legitimate options that are all going in the top 6 or 7 rounds of fantasy drafts. And Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, can they support all 3 of these guys? I'm not sure they can. In games where Drew Lock played the full year or played the full game last year, the Broncos only averaged 21 points per game, which would have ranked 25th in the league. And the only games that they scored 30 plus in were against the Raiders, Chargers, and Panthers, who were all putrid defenses last year. I think Noah Fant is going to be a guy that needs some very good efficiency to ascend to a great tight end, which is why I prefer Dallas Goedert, who's going to be our next guy, over Noah Fant for this year in redraft, just because I think Dallas Goedert has more room for targets in his offense.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. When you're looking at the offense in general, unless Aaron Rodgers is occupying the quarterback position for the Broncos, can we really see Drew Lock supporting all of these guys? Talking about Courtland Sutton, who we're drafting as a top 28 overall wide receiver right now. Talking about Jerry Jeudy, he's hovering around that wide receiver 35. And everybody, again, will have the optimism for Melvin Gordon, for Javonte Williams. Where does that really leave Noah Fant? I mean, he's going to get his regardless, and we still firmly believe in the talent to have him at 7 or tied for 7 overall. But there are question marks here in terms of overall volume. The reason why I'm able to keep him at 7 is because I do believe in the talent. I do believe in his role as really being that field stretcher type of options for Drew Lock. So, yeah, I do understand it's risky though. So we can move on to the next option, a less riskier option, probably the number 2 weapon in his offense behind a rookie, and in Dallas Goedert. So we can take it away with that.
Yeah, we already talked about this. It looks like Zach Ertz is going to get traded. I don't know when it's going to happen. It's now post June 1st, so he can definitely get traded with some, less cap casualties and situations of that nature. You already mentioned it. He's only competing really with Devontae Smith and Jalen Reagor for targets, neither of whom have really proven anything in the NFL yet. Devontae Smith, I would assume, is going to take more targets than Dallas Goedert because I believe a lot more in Devontae Smith than I did in Jalen Reagor. So I think at worst, you're looking at a guy who's probably going to be the second target in his offense. And I know it's Jalen Hurts throwing the ball, but to me, I trust Jalen Hurts with the second target in his offense more than I do Drew Lock in the third target in his offense. And Goddard is already coming off of a career best receiving pace this past season, totaling 65 targets, 46 receptions, 524 yards with only 3 touchdowns in 11 games played, or a 67 reception, 763 yard, 4 touchdown pace, which is basically the stat line that TJ Hockenson put up, as we talked about already. This is the last of the tight ends that I really feel comfortable projecting. And the last of the tight ends, to be honest, that I'll be drafting in the first, 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds of redraft leagues, because I just don't see anybody else beyond Dallas Goedert that I really want on my team.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And going into the next name, there is a clear tier break from Dallas Goedert to the next range we're going to be talking about, where, quite frankly, these are going to be your dart throws. So these are going to be your 9th, 10th plus round type of players that you skipped out on the position. You stocked up running backs and wide receivers early. You wanted just a guy that can maybe, fill in the role, fill in that tight end 8 to 10 range. And the first one for me that kind of intrigues me is going to be the remaining tight end from the LA Rams from last year. It's going to be Tyler Higbee. I mean, we all know at this point that the main saga of last year for the Rams is going to be who's going to be more impressive, Gerald Everett, Tyler Higbee. Well, guess what? Gerald Everett departs this offseason, and yes, he's coming off a tight end 17 finish in 2020. I understand that, but Higbee saw his target total drastically drop from 89 in 2019, where he was a tight end 8, to 60 this past year. So why do we really have him back up to that 2019 range? Well, I mentioned it. That Gerald Everett departure is really huge because it vacates 62 targets and 41 receptions from last year's tight end room. And then when you combine that with the fact that Matt Stafford is arriving, it should make this offense a lot more efficient, a lot more top heavy, a lot more able to put up points at will. Again, we're talking about a team that has top 5 overall offensive potential. I wouldn't be shocked if in this certain situation, Higbee really establishes his role as that middle of the seam type of guy, red zone type of option for this team. And in general, reclaims that upside that people want to say he had last year with Everett. It's so funny to me that people were hyping him up as TJ Hockenson type range last year, where TJ Hockenson is currently going this year around the 5th, 6th round. Is typically where you're seeing Higbee go last year. They were saying that all with when Gerald Everett was still in town. As soon as Gerald Everett leaves this year, everybody seems to be off of Higbee. And that's how Twitter works. You got to buy when they're low. You got to sell when they're high. So anyways, you can kind of chip in if you need to.
Yeah, I think he summed it up. Higbee, to me, should be a lot more valuable than he was last year. And like you said, last year we were drafting him as a top 10 tight end. So I don't see why he's not a top 10 tight end anymore, especially with a QB upgrade and a QB that used TJ Hockenson and helped aid his breakout year last year, even though Matthew Stafford didn't play the full season. So yeah, I totally agree. The touchdown upside should improve with Stafford there, and the target upside should be there as well, because we really only have Kupp and Woods in that offense, and Higbee can establish himself right behind those guys, along with some of their tertiary receivers that they have. So Irv Smith is our next guy, number 10 tight end. I'm not going to get into the whole spiel that we went over in the Dynasty video, but to sum up, basically, Irv Smith started to take over the tight end job last year, the tight end 1 job from Kyle Rudolph. From week 5 on, he was utilized in a much more consistent fashion. If you remove some of the games that he was injured against Detroit and Green Bay, his numbers paced out to 16 games were 65 targets, 50 receptions, 624 yards, and 9 touchdowns, which is basically the same amount of PPR points as Mark Andrews and TJ Hockenson, right in between them, in fact. Good for the tight end 5 on the season. And this was all with a few limited games included in that sample, and Kyle Rudolph still on the team, who now departs and vacates a good amount of production as well. Even if Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen combined for a big-time target share, 275, 300 targets, 310 targets, that should leave 200 to 250 targets up for grabs in this offense between Irv Smith and Dalvin Cook and whoever else is going to be a part of this. And Irv Smith showed his efficiency, even if he only gets 75, 80 targets this year. Number 2 in fantasy points per target and number 8 in yards per target amongst tight ends will help keep him efficient. And he was very good in the red zone last year as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And Irv Smith is the guy that we're really holding hope for, because again, this is kind of like a mini tier, if you will, because I personally have it as a Higbee, Irv Smith, and a guy we're going to be talking about at 12. But yeah, they're still late round tight ends. Again, As much as I believe in Irv Smith Jr., take advantage of the ADP right now. You can get him currently around the round 11 type area. If you can get him here and he ends up producing similar to what we believe his potential and his talent would dictate, you absolutely stole him, and he is going to be your next breakout tight end. We said this about Mark Andrews a couple years ago. We said this about George Kittle 3 years ago. We even said this, although he may not have been as consistent as we wanted, Jonnu Smith was still a fine tight end option last year. Irv Smith can develop to maybe a slightly better version of what Jonnu was, given the fact that the Vikings actually, throw the ball more than 480 times. We can absolutely see Irv Smith develop into that tertiary type weapon for this offense. So I fully agree. But anyways, we can go off to our 11th overall ranked consensus tight end. And that's going to be your boy, Mr. Brady, number one weapon himself over those years in New England. Well, guess what? This is his second year in Tampa now, similar to Brady. We're going to be talking about Rob Gronkowski. And let's be honest here. If OJ Howard was not coming back, he would most likely figure himself higher on this list. But as you guys can see on the screen, those first 4 games with OJ Howard on the field were pretty significant in Gronk's overall bottom line of producing. I mean, you see the PPR points per game drop from 10.96 without OJ Howard on the field to 4.45 with OJ Howard. And this is the main reason why I can't rank Gronk any higher or rank him ahead of guys like Higbee, Irv Smith, etc. And the pace that you see on the right there would actually pace to a tight end 8 finish with those just over 5 targets per game. I think the main shift here from games 1 to 4 to 5 to 16 were equally with the lack of Howard being on the field, in addition to Gronk really settling in. I mean, this is a guy who retired the year before, who was coming back and playing his first 4 games in the NFL. We shouldn't have expected him to just come in and light up the world, but we saw once he had the feet under him, once he really established himself in this offense, he became that steady type of force amongst the tight end position. So I feel like having him at 11 here is kind of balancing out the whole range of outcomes, because if he reclaims that role, if he can really be that red zone weapon, 75 type target guy, he could be very much way higher than where we have him currently at tight end 11. Again, that pace down the stretch, week 6 to 16 in particular, had an 11.9 PPR points per game pace, which was tight end 5 over that stretch. The problem, though, is because of that OJ Howard split, we kind of have to keep in the realm of possibilities that each of those tight ends are going to be chipping into each other. So while I do believe that, especially in best ball, Gronk provides a significant upside in this range, you still have a little bit of risk here because of OJ.
Right. And he's probably going to be a lot like what Jimmy Graham was like at the beginning of last year, where he's very touchdown or bust. But like you said, the splits are a little bit deceiving, obviously, because Gronk was coming off of a retirement. He wasn't playing a full role yet, but OJ Howard ran 19, 13, 11, and 16 routes the first 4 weeks of the season. And that's legitimate, tight end volume. And a team that runs a decent amount of 2 tight end sets, they also still have Cameron Brate and Tanner Hudson too. So they're going to use other tight ends along with Gronkowski. It's kind of a tight end by committee situation. Gronk is the most valuable because he gets the most red zone work and things of that nature. But at the same time, we didn't see OJ Howard on the field with Gronkowski last year for the whole season. And Gronk also has the injury concerns himself. So a lot of risk with him. He's not a guy that I want to be taking, if he goes in ADP right up where these Noah Fant and Dallas Goedert, if he starts creeping up in that range, I'm going to be completely out on the guy, because I just don't personally think he has that high of a floor. I think his floor is very low and his ceiling is probably modest at best still. He's still going to be a touchdown or bust type of guy, in my opinion.
Yep, I fully agree. So anyways, at this current portion of the tight ends, this is what you're getting. You're going to get tight end or bust guys. You're going to get decently middle tier type volume guys. So it's kind of just a mess, but a guy that actually had a good amount of volume last year, but unfortunately is one of the biggest losers of the offseason, as you guys would have saw with Corey's video. Take it away with Logan Thomas.
Yeah, and this is the last one we're going to go in depth on. Then we're just going to go rapid fire on the last couple guys that just missed out. But Logan Thomas was 3rd in the NFL in targets last year amongst tight ends with 110, which is a lot of volume for the position. 110 targets. I've mentioned on numerous times, occasions, that 6 to 8, top 6 to 8 should be your finish if you have 110 targets. It's pretty rare volume for a tight end. And like I said, he was number 3 in the NFL last year. Last year, Thomas was 3rd in dominator rating amongst tight ends, which is a percentage of his team's receiving production. And that'll be tough to accomplish again without the fact that he wasn't very efficient last year. He had number 26 in fantasy points per route run, number 24 in fantasy points per target. Yeah, he has Ryan Fitzpatrick coming in, which is a quarterback upgrade, but the signing of Curtis Samuel, the drafting of De'Ami Brown, and the return from injury of Kelvin Harmon, and the projection that we expect Antonio Gibson to take another step forward in the passing game as well, that's probably set to dent the 27.6 dominator rating that he had last year. I just think he was a guy that benefited from not a lot of options outside of Terry McLaurin. He was only a secondary target for that reason. And I think in addition to those players, he's still going to have to compete with Terry McLaurin for targets as well. And not to mention that the Washington football team actually threw the ball 601 times last year, which was top 10 in the NFL. And even with Fitzpatrick coming in, this defense is one of the best in the league. Like I don't expect them to throw the ball that much, especially with, Gibson set to take a step forward in the running game. I think they're going to be a more balanced attack. They're not going to throw the ball as much. I think they were throwing out of sheer necessity because they were so inefficient on offense that they couldn't score points.
For sure. Yeah. You basically summed it up with Thomas. I do have him at 11, but it's a very murky projection at this point because of those, it's a very murky projection at this point because there's kind of ambiguity of the situation and kind of guys settling into their roles. So I fully agree. So anyways, we got through the top 12. We'll rapid fire off these 13 to 15 if we want to go into a little honorable mention type of scenario. So at 13 for our consensus, we do have Cole Kmet. Mentioned him a ton in the Dynasty Rankings video, but we really love the kid's talent going into his second year. A ton of opportunity to really establish himself ahead of Jimmy Graham.
Guy, much like Irv Smith, who started to take over his number one tight end role down the stretch ahead of Jimmy Graham. I don't know how the hell Jimmy Graham's on the roster still, but he shouldn't be, and he might get cut at some point this offseason. Then Cole Kmet's ADP is going to shoot up to the sky. Mike Gesicki, we have at 14. They drafted a tight end in the third round. Mike Gesicki was never really the most efficient guy in the world, and they drafted Jalen Waddle 6th overall and signed Will Fuller in free agency. So if the target volume is not going to be there for Mike Gesicki, he's not a guy that I'm very much interested in, to be honest. And then real quick, we also have Jonnu Smith, Robert Tonyan, Adam Troutman to round out, that top 15-ish to 15 to 18 range. All of those guys have their own kind of question marks. Tonyan had a lot of touchdowns last year on not a lot of volume. Plus we have the Aaron Rodgers situation to worry about. Jonnu Smith is a guy that was signed for big money by the Patriots, but they also signed Hunter Henry. We have no idea how those roles are going to work out. And that could be a situation where come preseason time, once we see how they're divvying up those roles, one or the other could start to rise in ADP, and that could become a different situation at that point. And then Adam Troutman, Jared Cook's gone. New Orleans vacates all that production at the tight end position. We know how much Jameis Winston has used his tight ends in the past, and we know that really anybody outside of Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara have yet to produce consistently for that offense. And I'm not saying Troutman can do it, but he definitely has a good chance to work himself into a third role in that offense.
Yeah, fully. So with that being said, we can basically close off this video. If you guys actually are committed enough to watching our tight end rankings and made it a full 32 minutes deep or however long it's deep after it's edited down, comment down below, Warriors, because you guys are straight up Warriors for making it through this boringness. So anyways, love ya. See you guys tomorrow for the mock draft. Peace out.